So we're going to look at a Gabriel Moses style of lighting today, which is characterized by being really quite dark. It's got an underexposed feeling. Most of the time it has like a top light that's coming in. It's quite a soft light, but it's also very directional. It's the kind of lighting setup that works really well if you've got something soft like a Kino flow, or you could also set this up with LED lights. But again, we're going to base this today on a strobe lighting setup just to continue what we're learning with the course so far. And I think that's what most people will probably be using right now, is some kind of strobes or flashes. And again with this, like with all the other videos, this is to give you an insight in how you could build your own lighting setup, not to copy someone else's or say this is the definitive way that something is done, but just to learn, okay, this is how you can build and structure and layer light as you go on. And we're going to do this in the virtual simulation as normal. And what we've got today is we've got a box. I've started with a small studio space because actually you don't need a lot of space for this light. It's just about controlling the light. I've got a ceiling height of 5 meters, so it's pretty high ceiling. We're not going to use all of that, but just so that you know, it's a 6 meter by 6 meter by 5 meter box. And it's a white space also, but we're going to control the lighting as much as possible. Things to point out with this that are really important: we're not going to change the camera settings once we've established them. And when we bring lights in, we're not going to change the power of the lights. And I'm doing it this way just so that you can understand, okay, how do I control the light, not just power up or power down, which you would be able to do to fine tune that in our space right now. So I've dressed a model at the minute. It's something kind of fairly dark, but it's got a little hint of kind of reflective to the material. And we're just going to position our first light. So let's just spin around the space and see what we're looking at. So we're putting in Octa, and it's an Octa 90. So it's not a big light source. The bigger the light source in general, the softer the light's going to be, but I'm going to show you what you can do, how you can control this smaller light source here and with this Octa. And the first thing to notice with the Octa, it's essentially just an open Octa without the diffusion across, and it's just got a grid on the front. And you can see in the preview image on the right hand side, blown out highlights on the face. It's just a white wall, white floor, nothing exciting happening at this stage. Also, like if you look at the camera position, the Octa is slightly off to one side, and I'm shooting on f5.6, ISO 400, just giving that kind of ability to switch to film if I wanted to. And like I've said in other videos, I normally start in the studio at like f11, but I've gone for a different aperture this time, so I'm going with 5.6. And we'll keep that the same. Let's just look at it overhead and you can see that kind of offset light a little bit more clearly. And the first thing that we're going to do is transform our studio space and give it a bit of a backdrop. All I've got here is 2 panels, like 2 meters by 250, and it's a dark blue, and there's some kind of texture. It could be a cloth backdrop, it could be 2 coloramas set at an angle against each other, it could be that you're shooting in a corner of a room, or you could just throw some flats up into the studio. If anyone wants to know about like flat construction, I can do a video on that as well, because I've built a lot of sets in the past. So let's just spin around and see what that's doing, what we've got in our space, and we can zoom in here. And if we look at the preview image on the right hand side again, what we can see with this Octa is that it's hitting the backdrop on both sides. It's a little bit more positioning from the right, so it's hitting that right hand side. You can see it's kind of reflective, that backdrop. I could change the reflectivity of the backdrop for the simulation, but I want to keep it fairly high so that you can see it's about controlling the light. And the good thing about this setup, and all lighting in general I think, is there's points where it will look really terrible and you'll begin to kind of doubt yourself, but you've just got to go with it, trust the process, and begin to construct and build things over the top, and then you'll be fine. So let's just compare those 2 images side by side with the most basic thing that we've changed. Look at the face. We've got this really unflattering light into the eyes. We're shaping the face a little bit, but like I said, it's overexposed. The fall off onto the body is kind of okay. It's nothing interesting at this point. And then by adding that background in, we've at least added some kind of depth and dimension to the image. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add an additional light. And this is what I mean about beginning to trust your process and understanding how you want to construct the light. Because if we look at the image already and think, okay, this is way too bright, why would we want to throw in another light? Well, we're going to throw in that light because it's eventually going to become a fill light. Let's also just look at the power, because I didn't discuss that yet. So it's 6.2. Both the flash heads are the same in terms of the total output they could give. 1000 watt head on here. This Octa over the top is 6.2. And then the second light is 4.7. And again, this is a soft light. It's going to bounce in the ground and maybe bounce back up, but it's also just going to spread this kind of soft light across the body. It's a simple umbrella with a sock on the front of it. You could have another Octa in place. If you don't have that, you could have like a square softbox. You could vary the modifiers and still get a similar result with this. And let's compare those two. So this is the Octa only, and then this is the Octa with the front light. It's a minimal difference, but it's quite important. So you can see the shadow under the chin on both sides here. When we've got that fill light in, that shadow is not as dark and it's not as heavy. That's the most noticeable point. And you can see in the body that the shadows are lifted up just a little bit. And there's maybe a slight difference in the background where something from the second light is hitting that backdrop. Maybe it's not so heavy on this side also. The other thing that's really good about this, and it's really important, is it's cleaned up the eyes. On the image where it's without the fill light and it's just that Octa over the top, the eyes are quite hooded and it's really dark and heavy. And we just want to clean that up so that we know we've got light into the eyes, because that's often a big communication part of the image. And let's just zoom around so we can see what the difference is with that. Okay, and this light is about 3 meters. Let's flatten this up so you can see it's pretty much the same height as the Octa, but obviously it's pulled back away from the model. And like I said, it's bouncing down, but it's also going to spread out. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to try and begin to control that light. Maybe I don't want so much light bouncing around the space. And I'm going to put some kind of black flag in here. So this black flag could be a black polyboard that's cut in half. You could also do a similar thing by laying like black cloth onto the floor. You're just trying to stop the bounce. But also what I want to do is try and cut off some of the light that's kind of spreading into the body. So I've angled this black, and we'll kind of work with that setup as we go. And if we compare those two, well, you'll notice in this one, there's not a huge amount of difference right now. But as we begin to control the light more, you'll notice that flag is quite important. Then what I want to do is what we discussed in one of the other videos that we were talking about gels. We're going to tone the light. So we're going to tone the highlight, and we're going to get everything to sit back rather than adjust the power. So just to see with this, we're on 6.2 and we're going to add a gel, and we're still on 6.2. And the gel we're going to add here, dark steel blue. Just blue fits in the context of the background. It fits in terms of what the model's wearing. I know it's going to work well with the skin tone also, so I'm throwing a blue into there. You could vary what gels you have with this. And let's look at that preview image. So left-hand side is no gel, obviously. Right-hand side is with the gel. Immediately with the gel, everything is sat back. It's giving the impression that the lighting has changed, but it's more about it's toning that highlight. It also then does that kind of fairly subtle thing of putting the model and the background in the same kind of area. They have the same relationship, whereas in the image on the left-hand side, the model is coming really far forward from the background. Then the next thing we're going to do is keeping the Octa exactly the same, keeping that gel on it. We're going to go up here and we're going to put an internal diffuser as well as the grid. So as we've discussed before, a grid is really going to control the spread of the light, so it's not going to spill. It's going to allow you to control where that light hits. But then I've got an internal and external diffuser. So that's going to do two things. It's going to make the light much more soft, but it's also going to control that light more. It's going to give the feeling that less light is coming out, less light is hitting the model in the same way. And we can see that if we just compare these exposures, suddenly by putting the diffusion on, we've almost lost all of the light that's hitting the backdrop. We're focusing the light still using the grid. It's hitting the face. The highlight on the nose is maybe a little bright still, but we've got that directional quality that it feels like it's coming from the top a lot more than it was in the other image. And if we look at the subtle difference of where it's, say, the cheekbone and the hairline, the fall off into shade is more quick. And look at, say, how the hands have changed in here. Now we're just noticing the structure of the hands more than actually seeing the hands, just by adding those two diffusion panels. The Octa hasn't changed position, hasn't changed power. And with that fill light, we've also got the same gel. So now we're beginning to kind of match the light that's in the space. We're matching it with what the model's wearing and also what the backdrop is doing, and we're just toning that light. So everything is going to sit back. There's plenty of room for the photographer to work here. There's a little bit of room for the model to move around. That's fine if they need to, but a lot of his shots are quite posed and quite static, and you can tell that by the kind of small positioning that he's got where the light is, say, hitting the face. I don't think it's about shooting like super fast the way that he works. So we've got this controlled zone. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put another flag in. So let's look at the size of that. We've got 2 meter by 150. You could have like 2 by 2, you could have a 1 by 1. All we're trying to do is we're trying to stop some of the light hitting the backdrop. And also let's just zoom in here and you can see exactly where that light is hitting. We're kind of clipping like the top third of the light away. And again, you would need to vary where the flag works for you, what kind of angle you want it to be. But I'm stopping the light hitting some of the backdrop and maybe stopping the light hitting some of the forehead or the top of the hair. And I'm giving a more controlled feel to the light. And this could be, again, a small polyboard. You could use black card if you don't have polyboards for it. If you have a sizable piece of card, anything really that's going to cut that light out is important. Also look with the height now. It's about the height of the Octa, like the bottom part of the Octa, and we're just clipping that 1/3 of the light away. And let's compare those two. So we've got the Octa grid and diffusion on the left-hand side, and then the Octa, diffusion, grid, all those things, we just added the flag, and that's on the right-hand side. I think the things that are great to notice about that is just stopping a little bit of spill, like I said, at the top of the head, at the back of the head. It's also controlling the light that goes into the backdrop, so it doesn't feel so much that the model is standing in a kind of V-flat, it just sits everything back quite nicely. And again, it gives more feeling to that like top dominant light. Let's compare that to let's go to Octa only and then Octa with flag. So what are the stages we've done that with that? We've added diffusion, internal and external. We're using our grid, we're using our gel, and now we're using our flag. And see that horrible exposure that we've got at the beginning? And we've turned it into something that looks really controlled and it's quite nice. Its skin tone looks good. The light is sitting across the face really nicely. It's bringing the profile and the shape of the face that we couldn't see that in the first picture. And that's what I mean about kind of being confident you know where you're getting to when you're taking test shots, especially like if the model or subject wants to see them. If you're taking that first test shot, second test shot, and it looks horrible, just know, okay, I've got the confidence to get where I need to get to with this. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. So we've got the Octa, we've got the flag, camera settings are the same. We've got a nice fall off across the body. Now let's compare it if we hadn't put that fill light in. So all we're going to do with this one is we're going to take that additional fill light away, that one that we weren't sure what it was doing at the beginning, and have a look at those two images side by side. So on the left-hand side is the final setup, but with the fill light, and then on the right-hand side is without the fill light. Suddenly you can see the real importance of that fill light. You've got a shot that's nice on the right-hand side, but it's very shadowy, it's very dark, it's very heavy. It might work with some faces or some particular feeling that you want to bring out, but that fill light is really helpful because it's just lifting the whole body. Then you can see the clothes a little bit more. You also get this nice catch light in the eyes. It's lifting up the eyes. Whereas when you don't have that fill light, the eyes just become like really hooded and it becomes really intense. It's bringing a nice little bit of light into the neckline as well and onto the shoulders. Like I said before, we haven't changed the power, but it's just 4.7. And this one is 6.2. I'm going to power this up. I'll put this on 6.2 as well so you can see what happens if we... So let's see what it's like where we've got that fill light up on 6.2 now. So both the light sources are the same. 6.2 for the top Octa. Completely different feel. Again, this will be like a preference of what you want to decide with this, where you want to go with it. Maybe you want a bit more fill light, or maybe you want to drop that fill light down. Personally, I feel I like it when the fill light is much less. And it gives that top dominant feel to the Octa, but just showing you that that fill light is doing quite a lot, even when it's only 4.7. When you put it on the same power, it's kind of almost doing too much. And then in this setup, all I've done is I've taken the gel out of this light. So we had that steel blue in. I still got the steel blue in the fill light. So again, this will give you a real sense of where that dominant color is coming from and how strong that top Octa is. So on the left-hand side, we've got the final image that we were happy with. And then on the right-hand side, without that gel light. So the Octa doesn't have a gel on it. Suddenly it shifts the whole feeling of the picture. The model is kind of coming forward. It's not toned as much. It doesn't sit maybe in the right register. So toning that Octa is a really useful and really helpful thing to do. And again, you'll maybe want to choose what gel you want to tone it with, depending what the color of your set is, or whether you want to play it with or against the colors that the subject is wearing. So then we're going to make a little bit of a jump with this. We're going to keep the set positions the same, and we're just going to change that front flag, the one that's leaning at this angle, and we're going to put it as a white, so it's a fill card. And let's compare those two. So hopefully you can see now, with that black negative fill, we were blocking a little bit of light, but just see the real difference if we turn that into a white fill card, adding light. So it's taking that like top down sock light that's there, and it's just pushing it lightly up into the body. And it's adding maybe, I don't know, like a third of the stop of extra light. And you can see it a little bit more on the chin. You can see it filling in the shape of the body. So hopefully with that, you know, oh, I can really control the light if I want to. I've got a black flag over the top that's really controlling where the light hits the face and the top of the head. And then if I've got a white fill card or a black negative fill from the front, I know I can add light if I want to, or I can pull light away, but I don't need to change the power of my lights. I don't need to change the position of them. I don't even need to change the angle of them. These subtle differences will really give you control of your lighting setup. And let's look at the difference now. If we just move the background away from the model, obviously we would move the model forward, but it's just a little easier in a simulation just to kind of push the background back. And I've gone with that black negative fill at the front again. Let's just compare those two side by side. And even just by moving that background back, 40, 50 centimeters, falls off into a really dark, heavy color. Because we know that top light is being flagged, that front light is really just filling the model, and suddenly the background disappears into a really heavy blue or black. So again, even in a small studio space, you can really control the light with just two lights. Then the other thing also that we've done with this, if we just see the overhead version of this, I'm just turning the Octa. So the Octa was pointed a little bit more at the model's head. And instead of having it at the head, I'm just pointing it away. So it's kind of glancing past the model rather than hitting straight forward onto the face. If I flick between the two, it's easier to see. Just look how that fall off moves across the face with the way that we change that positioning of the light. Here, suddenly we're seeing this cheekbone, but if we move it slightly across, actually we're getting almost a shadow that moves here. Because that's an Octa with a grid on it and internal diffusion, minor adjustments will have a really big difference on where that hits onto the subject. So let's look at that positioning. If you watch the overhead image on the right-hand side and just watch the way the Octa changes, and we're pushing the Octa across. So it's a small difference. We're moving at like 20, 30 degrees, but it's a really big impact in how it shapes the model's face. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to swap this black fill card again, this black fill card here, the negative fill, and we're going to turn it into white. And we're going to angle this front light, the sock light down, and let's just put it as a solo light so we can see what that's doing. Fill light is really subtle, but without it, the image kind of falls apart, and it's just bringing a nice sheen to the body. Works super well with skin tone, but it's very soft. It's kind of non-directional. It's mimicking pretty much what the Octa is doing over the top. It gives the feeling of a top-down light still. A lot of the light is coming across here because it's up high and it's a similar angle, and then we've got that little fill and that little bounce that's coming in. One of the things with this lighting setup is it's really good to have that second light at a similar height to the Octa, because then it's just enhancing the feeling of the Octa. It's not giving you that impression that, oh, there's a second light throwing in from somewhere. And then with this one, what we're going to do now is separate those lights out. So I'm going to move the Octa so it's over the top, and I'm going to take this fill light down a little bit in height. Now with this front light, power is still the same, still has the gel on it. I've still got that negative fill at the front, and see what happens when we separate those out. So let's compare this one. And hopefully you can see with this is where it's really important to get positioning right. We're changing that position of the Octa, and you can see it when you flip between the two previews. This was the normal setup where the lights were kind of working in harmony with each other. And this is the light where we've sort of separated them. The Octa is a little bit more top. It's kind of pushing back across the model now, and our fill light is coming a little bit lower in height and it's pushing more into the body, and it's sort of separated the effect out. And again, it depends what you want, but to me the image on the left hand side looks a little bit more harmonious because it looks like it's kind of lit almost by one light source. But now just by moving the Octa forward and moving the front light down a little bit, it suddenly looks like two light sources. I noticed the separation on the nose, like the bridge of the nose seems to kind of break apart from the rest of the face, and here it seems to fit together. Also notice that like highlight into the chest has changed because we've changed that front light and that top light in combination. We're maybe not sitting the light on the cheekbones as much. So it's a very subtle difference, but it makes a big difference in the way you're going to read the picture. And let's just see what we did again. Let's flick between the two. So the Octa is moving forward, and that front light is moving down. Power is still staying the same. If we go towards what our final setup would be, for me, what I'm happy with at the minute is this kind of setup here. I've got space that I can still shoot, move around, everything's fine. I've got my Octa that's pushing across the face, but it's still a nice top light. It's gonna shape the face and shape the cheekbones. I've got this front fill light, just not too much power into it, but it's mimicking the angle and the height of our front light. So the light is kind of working together. For me, I like having this black flag over the top, because again, it just controls some of that spill. It doesn't push too far across the face. And just having some kind of black fill at the front as well, negative fill. So we could put, like I say, curtain on the floor, just some kind of material that's gonna soak up the light. Suddenly I feel I've got something that's really nice and controllable, and the model can pose and move around, and their face is gonna look amazing still. They could really stare down the camera and it will look strong and powerful. They can lift the head up and it will really shape the face because I've got that nice, really soft top light. And if I need to show the clothes a little bit more, I can just put a little bit more light into that fill light. So let's say this is our final image, and let's see our positions here and the stages we went in. The awful kind of feeling that we had at the beginning, it begins to kind of build itself together. It's getting more and more controllable till we've got something that I think fits together quite nicely. Let's just look at that image and maybe our first Octa only image. So there we have it. It's pretty simple, nice 2-light setup, just using some basic flags, a little piece of set, some gels, and we've managed to get a controllable soft light. It's got a really good feeling to it. Again, we haven't changed the camera positions. We didn't change camera settings. We didn't change the power of any of the lights. We just used our diffusers, our gels, and our flags to control the space. I think it's a great lighting setup to work in a small space and get some really intense feeling on portraits. And it gives a little bit of a feeling, like I said, of that kind of soft LED light, that Kino flow feel maybe, which is sort of painting the body with light. So there you go. I hope that was useful. If you got questions, let me know in the comments. And thank you as always for watching. I really appreciate it.